What I want to talk to you about is the Climate Crisis Advisory Group's report on the path beyond fossil fuels. The subheading is Seeking a Just and Orderly Transition. What I think is critically important to understand, this report sets out the costs of a global energy transition. We point out that the costs are significant, but very modest in comparison to the profits currently being generated by the oil sector. They've been making an estimated $3 billion a day for some 50 years. So we just need to bear in mind the context of the overall cost of energy and how the transition is going to involve a switch away from all fossil fuel-based energies. Now, what is important to understand is the state of the world today. We know that with the rise in temperatures occurring so rapidly, particularly in the Arctic Circle region, the whole planet is now under threat. And if we're going to create a manageable future for humanity, we will have to have a deep and rapid emissions reduction process for all countries in the world. So we need this in the shortest possible time. Yes, we're aiming for net zero by 2050, but quite frankly, any time shorter than that will be a considerable help to everybody in the world. So we need to understand the absolute urgency of the task in hand and the need to start from where we are. Instead, each country must currently take full responsibility for its own pathway. It is crucial that the wealthiest nations, which have done the most to put high levels of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, carry the greatest financial responsibility going forward. And that financial responsibility means they need to be defossilizing their economies faster than the rest of the world. We must get there well before 2050 with the developed world, and at the same time, do their best to help developing countries make this transition. So let's look at the key transition parameters. The CCAG is calling for a whole series of processes to be put in place. Carbon pricing, regulation, assistance to developing countries must all be part of this solution, led by this group of willing nations to carry out the specific annual emissions reduction targets, with reductions starting immediately. There is, I'm afraid, already a loss of trust between the developing and the developed world. And this loss of trust became very apparent at COP26. The continued absence of promised climate funding to support poorer countries' management of climate change impacts has had a well-reported corrosive impact on trust. Regaining trust will be critical if countries are to work together effectively. 2010 was the date when the developed world promised $100 billion a year to assist the developing world to make this transition and to deal with the impacts of climate change. That fund has never reached anything like that sum. It was intended to be public money. It was intended to be funneled through the Green Climate Fund, and the Green Climate Fund has been consistently underfunded. The alternatives to fossil fuel require governments to pull all available levers, and different countries doing this at different times to achieve this. Government action has been very successful in developing cheaper alternative energy sources, where governments have introduced, for example, feed-in tariffs. It is government actions and regulations that drives us forward. Now, the energy transition demands that we look at different platforms. There are multiple dimensions: labor, finance, research and development, governance, decommissioning of fossil fuel systems, and so on. Now, some of these areas already have platforms capable of delivering, and finance, in fact, has many of these. trading and regulatory norms and so on. But we need all of these brought into action much more quickly. We need to also really look at the energy transition benefits. There's so many win-wins in achieving the energy transition. Energy bills are lower while absolute energy needs reduced due to new efficiencies produced in the transition process. Air quality improves. Mobility in cities is safer, quicker, more dignified and inclusive. Active lives are more easily led, and health outcomes improve. We see all of these advantages. Nations experience economic growth and job creation when they build reliance on local energy supplies from solar, wind, and hydropower. Economic growth can also go hand in hand with reforestation and regenerative farming. Now, if we just look at the tipping points and infinite loss question, we know that if the West African or Indian monsoons were to fail, and this is a possibility, there's no monetary compensation that could possibly make up for the loss. Equally, if there was heat stress in a given part of the world, it is quite feasible that countries where air conditioning is not feasible for most people, that we could see upwards of 1 million people dying of heat stress in one of these heat-related events that are now happening around the world. Extreme heat is extremely difficult to deal with in terms of human ability to survive. So we know that all of these severe tipping points that we talk about can lead to massive transitions. So what we see is the possibility of infinite loss appearing, and infinite loss actually, of course, is the big challenge. And what this means is speeding up that transition to the alternative energy sources, to fossil fuel sources, not creating more availability of fossil fuels. So I believe this report is dealing with the crucial transition that is required and what is needed to achieve it. We really have to focus on all aspects of this. And in that sentence, who do I mean by we? All of us. And therefore, we must see that the United Nations finds a way to see that we can create a more orderly transition, a more just transition to the fossil fuel-free future that we need. Thank you.